one thing you appreciated most about Papa Cabina's visit with us. And I will tell Papa Cabina, you got me off my couch on Saturday. He's the only person who got me off my couch on Saturday during the hip hop workshop. So I appreciate you very much. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Brady, is there a thing or not a thing? I can do it.
Was super documented. Was it the one where I'm like every single step I did? Because you're telling me I did something else. I came out of range.
When I read it out, it wasn't the way
That's good.
organization.
So we did the spirit. Nice. And you
All right, so can I just have 2 or 3 people just popcorn? What inspired you from that performance? Put a voice in the room. Someone share what they heard or what they said.
The fact that he's giving back to his community and just shared a story about how he got to this community.
Your story is really powerful. Thank you for that. Anything else discussed at your table about his visit?
How I got flashbacks because when I was a teenager, I used to do all that battling stuff, and I was obviously a lot thinner and more mobile. If I were to try the stuff that I did then, like what he was doing, I'd break. Literally.
Thank you for being with us. And I hope you do get to catch a little of our why and our how here, because I think where we are on the journey right now and having you begin for us tonight really is fitting for, I think, the bridge we're about ready to cross into Leap Year Day this week. So I titled this tonight in honor of MMSD Arts Liaisons. What will our 21st century MMSD Arts Ed legacy be? And it scares me a little bit to think that next year we're already a quarter way through this century. We made a lot of promises in the 90s about what we were going to do with it when it was the 21st century, and here we are, quarter of the way through. Still got 3/4 of the way to go, at least some of us anyway. So this is about grounding you in what has happened in the first quarter of the 21st century. And some of you have been on the journey all along with me. The whole story I'm going to tell tonight is your story with my story. And others of you, you've joined at some point in this journey. Some of you maybe just yet this year. So for some of you, this is going to be a trip down memory lane. Karen, you've been with me for so much of what I'm going to share tonight. Karen's the City Arts Administrator. For those of you who may not yet have met Karen Wolf.
Give away, Karen.
Oh, I'm so young. Does that mean we're old?
Yep. Confirmation. It's happening. And then Elena, dear Elena, who's been on the journey with me, boy. So we don't tell too many people this, but she was my middle school band student at Cherokee in an all-boy brass and percussion class. Let that sink in for you. But she and I would have those like eye looks, 7th grade, all brass and percussion boy sectional class. We both survived. No, she played trumpet. In that particular year, I just had a real imbalance in gender across all of the choices. It was better in other years than hers, and that meant she also went to Phi Ed with that same group of gentlemen. And I also
remember that part.
Oh, I remember that. That's my job to remember that. No, so we go back there, but along this journey, she joined me when she came to Overture, and so there's that as well. So tonight is really in honor of all my teammates, those of you who worked with me in the district. I I met you at Sherman.
Cherokee.
Sherman.
Oh, really? Sure.
Didn't I meet you at Sherman first? Were you
I
at
was
Sherman?
at Cherokee.
Oh, just Cherokee.
Cherokee first. I was at both, but I swear we met at Cherokee. It's been
I,
a while.
1991, where were you? I told you, we're getting old. I met you at Sherman first, and then again later through our journey. Because I was a young pup. That was my very first year. And I remember I was only there part-time.
Wait a minute, because I started in 1990 and I was at Cherokee for 3 years, so that was Cherokee.
But I wasn't at Cherokee till 96. You and I are gonna have to figure this out. You and I are gonna have to figure this out. Because, okay. See what happens? So now you're gonna believe anything I tell you tonight. All right, so the whole thing is about the journey tonight, but then really who's gonna write this next chapter? So who am I? For those of you like, who's the crazy lady who doesn't remember stuff? My name is Lori Fellens, and I started teaching in the district, as I said, in 1991, actually at Van Hise, 2/10. I taught in Montello on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I was their junior high band director on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I taught general music at Van Hise on Tuesday and Thursday with Maggie Steele, for those of you who remember Maggie. And that was a long year, because that commute was, and I lived in Sun Prairie. I really lived out of my trunk, because my boyfriend, now my husband of 30 years, lived in Oregon, and I just kind of drove around that year. And so that second year, Sherman had just reopened. That's why I thought you were there. Sherman had just reopened. It had been closed, I don't know if you all know that, for quite some time. And it was an set of insurance offices, and it was a daycare. And the band room happened to be in the room where the daycare was, which meant it had carpet that had been peed on. And it was one of the only band rooms in the district that actually had a functioning urinal in it. Does anyone know this about Sherman?
Probably Kenny does.
Right? Yeah, is a thing.
You know about the urinal?
Oh yeah, it's in the band room.
Yeah, and at that time, the bathroom was still open. I think at some point along the journey, someone got smart enough, and is it open anymore?
Sure is.
Okay. These are only things you learn from working at MMSC. But Sherman then, because they were adding a grade at the time, by my third year was like, well, would you like to be here full time? So I was at Sherman for a few years, and then I transferred to Cherokee in 1996, and I was there 15 years. And part of this journey then is going to intersect with what happened then when I became the teacher leader by accident, and then the fine arts coordinator. And then currently today, I am the executive director of Wisconsin School Music Association, WSMA. We run all the solo and ensemble festivals and State Honors Project. Wisconsin Music Educators Association, so I support our state's music educators. And then also, because they didn't think that was enough, I'm also the executive director of their foundation. So there's 3 nonprofits that own a building in Waunakee called the Wisconsin Center for Music Education, and we are out there. So tonight is about the journey and what has happened to arts education since, and I'm gonna start at 1993. But before I do, I'm gonna tell you why I chose to just simply tell this story. It's because I strongly believe this statement that's on the UW-Madison History Department's website, like why should you study history? Because basically, it lets us look at what has happened and analyze what's happened in the past. It positions us to see patterns that might have been invisible while they were happening, and then provides a crucial perspective for understanding and solving, hopefully, current and future problems. And the last sentence of it, which is really the key, to study history is to study change, right? And so I'm hopeful that by telling you the history, unfortunately I've lived it all, because I told you I started in 91 and I'm starting in 93. I pass the torch of what happened as impartially as I can tell the story as possible to you, and then you write the next chapter. With me?
Yeah.
Okay. So tonight is the who, the what, the when, the why, and the how, then, and now for any given child. So we're gonna start with 1993 to 2012. What was critically important in 1993, and I'll show you a slide in a minute that has the breakdown of some of these in chronological order, is that The Civic Center at the time, which was part of this building, but it didn't exist yet, right? And the Oscar Mayer Theater was the arts entity in Madison. And Kennedy Center in DC had started a new program called Partners in Education. And so, Overture, remember, doesn't exist yet. MMSD and the Civic Center joined Any Given Child's company, which is Partners in Education, in 1993. So you notice from 1993 to 2004, there was no Overture. They don't enter the scene really till 2004. But there were some big things that happened in those 10 years that I want to make sure you all know about. The first one is, Mariel Wozniak was the fine arts coordinator at the time. And Dr. Wozniak, she was a champion for all things arts education. Those of us who remember her, she carried around her binder, which I remember when I first got in that office downtown, it was one of the first things, it was still there and I was so excited. All her annotations. She would go into any meeting, disrupt any conversation that was about taking things away from the arts. And I like to think back on that time, again, this is history and I'm reflecting. She kind of single-handedly was the glue that held the parts that were starting to break apart at that time together, but because she was so masterful at it, she disguised the cracks. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
I see a lot of nodding from those of you who knew her. There were a lot of cracks. There were a lot of cracks forming. Things like, this was the big one. Well, if 21 sections at 60 minutes a section at elementary equals full-time, what if we just add minutes to it and it is more like 24, 25 sections at elementary would be full-time? What's the harm? What are they doing with that extra time anyway? Anyone remember that? Full-time elementary used to be 19 to 20, 21 when it was high sections. And in that 10-year period, it got pushed all the way up to about 25 sections by pushing minutes of instructions in the contract. But because, this is Lori's observation, because anytime we would go forward with the contract and try to point out what was going on, it'd make it so far, but then there'd be some bigger fish to fry in the list of all the problems in the district, and it would never make it to the place where something could get done about it. And so it was the thing that every year the district kept having more success in moving the dial on. The other thing that happened in that time period was that there was something called 4th grade strings and 5th grade strings at elementary. And there were two pieces that were really the negotiating tools whenever there was a financial issue, and that was cutting 4th grade strings and this minutes of instruction piece. So Mariel retired in 2001. So 2001 happens, she retires, and that position was filled by a man, bless him, he has since passed, but his name was Rick Neuenfeld. And Rick came to us from a district in the state where advocacy looked more like, again, these are my words, more like fighting. Mariel was the master at asking people hard questions and then getting them not being able to answer hard questions. Rick's approaches were much more like, I'm going to battle. And he lasted 2 years. And if you Google this, it's still up, because some of these things I'm going to tell you, I don't want to put in my presentation, but you can check them out yourself. You can still find reference to the things he said to the media when he left. He was super frustrated. And that was 2004-05. And he left suddenly. And so all of a sudden there was talk of eliminating the fine arts coordinator position altogether. Why would we need that position downtown? Something critical happened though. In that year he was gone, we didn't have a real fine arts coordinator, and it was the year before Julie Pelkowski. Dr. Pelkowski was hired the year after this, and that is that they named a former assistant superintendent, Dr. Rita Applebaum, to the position for 1 year. In the summer of 2005, she convened a group of music and art educators and community members, and a report was generated called Design for Equity. Now think about this, 2005. This is way before the district's bigger pushes in that area. It's called a Design for Equity, and what we looked at that summer is where are our kids not getting opportunities because of which school they happen to be at, not because of what the district's providing. And in that report, there were some critical things named. And when that report went to the school board, and Julie was hired, and they were pushing to get rid of 4th grade strings. How many of you were around for this swirl? But we happened to have a bunch of kids who memorized the same strings music for Strings Festival, so we had many kids to go around Doyle playing their instruments. Just saying. For real, you could put 250 kids who all know the same music in a school board meeting, because they did. The benefits of Strings Festival. There was major pushback. They formed the Fine Arts Task Force. The school board said, okay, we need to take a look at this. Karen was part of the Fine Arts Task Force. And here's the interesting part. This is where all this happens by accident to me. I'm still teaching at Cherokee. I'm a band lady. That's who I am at that time. But they asked me to be the music teacher representative on the Fine Arts Task Force group. So I started attending these Fine Arts Task Force meetings between 2005 and 2009. And a whole host of things happened. One, there was a lot more conversation. At the 11th hour, we saved 5th grade strings, but we didn't save 4th grade strings. But there was a critical decision that came out of it in 2010, which was that the school board gave $100,000 unrestricted funding to the fine arts budget downtown, specifically to fund the findings of the Fine Arts Task Force. Like, it was earmarked money that was put in, Dan, I'm looking, was earmarked money that was put into a special account, had different codes than all the other funds. I'm still a teacher, but I know about this money, right? And I know about the findings. Julie Palkowski was the Fine Arts coordinator at the time. I promise you all this stuff matters in the end, so stay with me on this. So Dan Nered is now superintendent. So it was Art Rainwater when Rick Noonfelt was here. It's now Dan Nered. Dan Nered made a decision in the 2009-10 school year to cut the entire curriculum and assessment department. That's what it was called at the time. Literally eliminate it and restructure it and call it curriculum and instruction. And then everyone who was an administrator in that department, depending if they had 1 year left in their contract or 2, had to leave their position. How many of you knew about that? Any of you? Yeah, he eliminated the whole department. Which is when Dr. Palkowski, who still had 1 year left on her contract, had to look for a different position because of the job of fine arts coordinator had been eliminated completely, but along with literacy coordinator, math coordinator, all the coordinators. So it's now 2010, and they post teacher leader positions for the new department. And I applied. Here's the part of the story a lot of people don't know. I applied. It was August. I'd been teaching for 20 years in this district, and I love my kids at Cherokee. And I went to the first interview, and I got home, and there was already a message asking me to go on a second interview, and I called and I declined it. And I did not take the job. And they hired someone else. And that was at the beginning of 2010. That lasted 3 weeks, and the person was no longer there. Can't make this stuff. And so a lot of people asked me to please reconsider because they realized that I had something others didn't, and it was just simply the knowledge. I had the knowledge of what had happened in the task force meetings. I knew what needed to happen, and I understood the district after working here for 20 years and how it operated and all the things. And so I reluctantly, on September 28th, 2010, year of Act 10, took the teacher leader job in the new department that had never existed before, and I went downtown. But I didn't waste a minute. I knew all the stuff that needed to happen, and everyone was so busy being worried about all sorts of other things, and especially Act 10, that I was able to move really fast that year, extremely fast. And I knew that we had money to pay for the things that were in the Design for Equity report. And that's where the Equitable Arts Access Funding Plan for 2011-12 came from, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So now I've brought you up to 2011. I covered a couple decades pretty quickly, right? Okay. Questions so far about anything I've shared? Because we go a little more in depth with the rest of the decades, but you kind of had to know what that all happened. Okay. Well, there was one problem with naming me the teacher leader. Is that, again, those of you who've been around, do you remember when you used to have to apply for tenths? Like, you'd get surplused at the end of the year, like half the art and music teachers would get surplus, but then you had to apply for your tenths and interview for them to try to figure out where you were going to go. And you'd go through an interview and then they'd say, what's your schedule? And you'd tell them and they'd say, well, that doesn't work. It was a nightmare. And I always called the bottom of the potato chip bag, you know, like when you get down to the, you're still enjoying the potato chips, but you're near the bottom. And you're trying desperately to find something that has substance. That's what it was like. People would have 7 tenths, they needed 3 tenths, and they were in the potato chip bag late. And the principals hated it too. So another key thing that happened during that 2010-11 is I started to explain to HR that I could make things better. But the problem was I wasn't an administrator, so I couldn't do anything. So sorry, can't help you. But I know how to help you, but I can't help you. And so in 2012, I was the first administrator named back in that department as an administrator. Because they knew if I was an administrator, then I could do the work. And this is the one piece I'll tell you out of sequence just so I wrap up that story. So in 2013-14, they convened an MTI District Joint Committee, and that was the first year they allowed me to assign all those potato chip tenths in a more meaningful way. And that was a hard point to get at because people really had to trust that I was gonna have people's best interests at heart. And even though I taught in the district for 20 years, you know how it is, I knew my people in the district, but I didn't know all the people, and our teachers didn't know me very well, and that was a big stretch. And so that was another critical piece to our story, is that up until that point, the allocation stuff was a nightmare. And I know it's still not so lovely, but made some improvements. All right, so 2011, the other big thing that happened with the Fine Arts Task Force, now is where Overture starts to enter. Remember, Overture came in to play in 2004. They were around for a few years, but it really wasn't until 2006-07 when we were doing the Fine Arts Task Force. They had just hired a new employee, Tim Sellers. He was brand new to Overture, and he started attending the meetings. And you remember this Partners in Education thing? It had sat dormant for quite a long time. So there was this Kennedy Center's Partners in Education piece. We weren't really doing anything together of any substance between Overture and the district yet. And so Tim and I attended one of the annual meetings in 2011. And we together went to a presentation about Any Given Child. We left that presentation and said, that might be the answer to some of the things we're looking for. So I'm going to combine two things here. First of all, remember the Equitable Arts Access piece? This was funding in the fine arts budget that created a plan, in mostly elementaries, although it was extended to middle, that dealt with communication, time, and advocacy. The model was designed to address all three of these issues, to access teaching artists, community arts organizations. And so in 2011-12 school year, we launched this. The 3 rotations at that time intentionally were dance and movement, theater, through the lens of Opera for the Young, and then we had a visual art component to it. So Opera for the Young, interestingly enough, is here tonight. And this is another thing people might not know, but between the years of 2011 and 2014, with a theory of action, Opera for the Young was at all 32 MMSD elementary schools. We pulled it off. Because here's what the theory said. If we provide principals with 3 things, some money, so it was $500, but someone to coordinate all the contracts and getting them lined up to go, helping support bus systems, will schools bring in teaching artists? And those 3 years, there were so many teaching artists going into schools because we had funding. It was a newer model. There was a lot of conversation about it. And Opera for the Young worked with me because a lot of the reason schools reported not bringing in a group like Opera for the Young wasn't what they offered artistically. It was all the other red tape that comes with trying to bring in teaching artists. Where am I going to find the money and how am I going to do that? So this model, which has continued since then, I think fell a little bit dormant after I left, and I'm hearing that it's being revived. I think this is critically important because without a structure, our schools really struggle. And when I say schools, I'm talking about administratively, but also like the wonderful clerical teams in our schools with how to pull some of these things off, and a central office can coach that and then provide some initial funding. The other thing I did is I had $5,000 in reserve so that if a school said to me, I can't pay the difference, because the Opera for the Young didn't cost $500. It costs several hundred more than that. Not a single one of those 32 elementary schools asked me for more help. I was ready for it, but they didn't. Because I also believe our schools do have resources that they can draw on if we can provide the majority of what they need and provide that support. So Tim Sowers is at Overture. We went to the meeting. I knew we had equitable arts access, and we called Karen. So another memory lane thing. The mayor was Dave Sislevich. The president of Overture was Tom Cardo, and the superintendent was Dan Yoder. Within the first 12 months of our idea, the president of Overture was Ted Deedy, the mayor was Paul Foglin, and the superintendent was Jennifer G. 12 months, right? Like, it all turned over. But Karen, Tim, and I were like, okay, we can survive this. I still remember those meetings. We had to go resell it a second time before we applied because we were in the middle of applying when all of the leaders were changing in the city. And in July of 2013, we were named the 12th city in the United States for any given child. So we made this application. Like I said, then Jen Cheatham came. The other big thing that was happening under Karen's fabulous, fantastic leadership was there was a big cultural plan being released in the city of Madison at the time, calling on us to work better together as education and the community on behalf of our kids. So it was really a wonderful time to figure out how might we work better together with shared resources across the arts community, the school district, and the city. I'm gonna pause there just to see if Elena or Karen want to add anything before I go on with the story for the next 4 years, but any thoughts about that?
No, I'm liking the story.
That was our logo. I pulled it out. I kind of like their new one, but I really liked this one. So the primary goal of this program that we applied for was that the Kennedy Center and the supports for the program would assist communities in developing and implementing a plan for expanding arts education in their schools, ensuring access and equity for all students in grades 8. K through 8, sorry. And this was the map at that time, when we applied. So again, we were city number 12. That was the map when we applied, and this is the map today. Well, 2022, that's the most up-to-date thing on their website, so. So after a press conference that happened, beautiful press conference, we set out to launch phase 1 with 35 community arts team members who'd been identified during the application process and a Kennedy Center visit. And we worked with their consultants to develop our plan. And I think one of the main things, messages I want to have today is you gotta know what your plan is in order to have a plan, and who has input on your plan is extremely important. So in that year of planning, more than 150 arts organizations responded. 150 people from the arts organizations responded. There was a total of 42 that were represented. And we asked both programmatic and attitudinal questions about arts education. School personnel, we had 1,500 responses from teachers, administrators, and others. And we didn't have a single school that wasn't represented in the responses. That also was no easy undertaking. For those of us who work in current, former, present, future MMSD, getting 1,500 people to respond to anything is its own project. Yes? And those were primarily attitudinal questions. And then we mapped out, using data provided by the schools, what was going on at 32 elementary schools and at that time 12 middle schools. And here's the data from 2012, 2013. So across the top, you see different art form areas that were identified at the time: dance, music, theater, orchestra, visual arts, integrated arts, spoken word, media arts, other. What do you notice? Anything stand out?
The higher the grade level, the less specific, arts, I guess, certified specialists there are.
There's no dance.
Yep.
A lot of zeros.
A lot of zeros, no dance. There's a decline in middle school. Lots of zeros. So right now, we all come together tonight as liaisons, and we all have our day jobs, and we might represent an art form. When you think about art and access to performing arts, visual arts, media arts, and all that they encompass, those zeros represent opportunities for our youth. Those zeros represent what they get during the school day. Those zeros represent real kids. Those zeros represent Papa Kobina. Because did you have a class during the day at West where you got to do that?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
I'm forgetting her name, but we had, I think it was after lunch around like 1 or 2 p.m. We would have opportunity to take some dance classes. We would learn.
Kelly Adams?
Yeah,
Yep.
Kelly Adams.
The one school that had high school dance at the time, well, no, La Follette had a social dance class, and then Memorial had them, and then it started to disappear and had this space. And Kelly was sort of the one who remained.
And she kept teaching there while I was there. But before I got to West, there was like dance clubs that would, I doubt, happen afterwards, but nothing during the day.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because the key to any given child is during the school day. Because yes, there's lots of opportunities outside school, but then the equity and access issues set in, right? I mean, like, we want those things for our students and youth also, in addition to. So this, any given child, is about what's going on during the school day. And again, this is 2012, 2013. Yep.
Question. The music that you have up there, that's general music, correct?
Up through 5th grade, except for the orchestra column, yes.
Okay,
And then in,
cause I noticed no band and then no orchestra in middle school, that's why I'm kind of like.
well, so there was no orchestra in middle school listed because the numbers, the question wasn't asked there in the way it was asked. The orchestra numbers went into the music column. So the way the questions were asked, orchestras included in the music percentage column at that point. It wasn't separated out. The only reason there's a column there is 5th grade offered 5th grade strings.
The band is also included in that music column?
Correct. So that was the combined percentage of band, choral, and orchestra at the middle school level at that time.
Wow, that's bad.
Yeah, so part of it was just the way that the data, was reported. The other thing that happened in 2014, which was really powerful, was that 15 national organizations came together and created what's called the Shared Endeavor Report. So this is from 2014, but it was happening as an overlay at this time. and said, what do we really mean when we say arts education for all students? And it was the biggies, you know, National Association for Music Education, National Art Education Association, Kennedy Center, the NDEO, the National Dance Education, so forth. So these were 15 big players in national arts education. And I still use this today. It's one of the most powerful graphics I have to tell you the story of what was going on. See, if you put students in the center, at that time, in that data, they had access to certified arts educators, the RED, in K-5 because the state law in Wisconsin requires it. And we're so lucky that we have a state law that requires it. Because all you have to do is go to any given child, right? Start talking to states that don't have that law.
And people may not know that.
You are so lucky to live in a state that has Wisconsin legislative code that requires access for all well, it's supposed to be K-6, it's another story, but. So, we have the RED covered in visual art and music if you consider, okay, my bias is already come up. If you consider 60 minutes a week of a content area over, if you're lucky, because classes take field trips, 32 weeks, because it's not really 36. Our kiddos are missing sometimes and all the things. And you do the math. Our kids have 32 60-minute blocks a school year in arts education and they have that much literacy instruction in 2.5 weeks in the Madison School District. So we have the arts educators and we have access to them. Just the time is, challenging. And we had access to community arts providers, the Blue, but at that time, we just kicked off the equitable arts access. We were trying to increase that. Some teachers were bringing kids in all the time. We had the SMART project where kids were getting funding to go to our Chazen and Amoka Museum because we had just a fabulous curriculum project around that. But there really wasn't any approach to how were these community arts providers really going to reach our kids, and especially in those under-allocated areas of dance and theater and spoken word and so forth. And then we have the yellow, which is the classroom teachers at those schools. But if you look at where the rich benefits to arts education come in is when these three groups of people, the certified arts educators, the community arts providers, and the classroom teachers, provide our students integrated opportunities together which create the purple, the blue, and the orange. And if that happens, our students get a sequential, standard-based arts curriculum with deep expertise and professional expertise, like Papa Cabina coming into your class, and standards-based connections between the arts and other areas. So what any given child was setting out to do was, how do we make the purple and the blue and the orange happen without losing the red? And that was, and I think continues to still be, a bit of a challenge. So that year of surveying, here were the findings from the Any Given Child team. That general music and visual arts are taught by certified arts teachers in all K-5 schools, and nearly all students have access. There are no K-8 dance or theater specialists. But then there was a note, because dance is taught at some schools as a unit through physical education classes. So there was that, but that again becomes school dependent. Very few students were exposed to instruction in spoken word, media arts, and arts integration. And those of you who teach middle school, hours of music and art instruction vary greatly in 7th and 8th grade. All depends what school you're at. Site-based allocation and scheduling models at secondary level impact equity and access. School access to arts organization and teaching artists varies greatly, and there's no quality or training system for community artists or arts organization. We were talking less about their art form and more about what does it look like when you take your art form into a room of 7th graders, right? So the community arts team worked very hard, and well, then what's our vision? Knowing that that's true, and this is the vision that I believe still stands today for Any Given Child. all these words have deep meaning and had plans behind them. It's the vision of the Any Given Child Madison Community Arts Team that all students have access to a comprehensive arts education with inclusive, diverse, and integrated learning in all art forms every year. How many of you have schools where that entire vision is a reality? 2/3 of it? I'm starting to see this. 1/3 of it? Like part of it? Luke, do you mind, like, what part?
Well, I mean, inclusive, diverse, and integrated in all is a tricky word, so definitely not 2/3 of the way to all, but like, because there are things like PE taking on some dance and music taking on some dance, and like some theater adjacent things incorporated into art. I mean, there's some of that. And equitable arts access funding has meant we've had some of, visiting
Fantastic.
artists and things, whatever. So whatever, I can safely say we have a fraction.
I'm gonna get back to Luke in a little bit, because I'm gonna add something to what you said, but I wanna get to the part where I can ask you a question with it that might pull everybody else in. So the 5 goals that were then developed. 1, to cultivate leaders and develop and sustain systems that support arts education. Create arts-rich schools. Cultivate a community network. Develop an accountability system that tracks and reports what happens relative to equity and access. And then advocacy, which I would probably move to the top if I was rewriting them, because I think without that, the rest don't tend to happen. And at that time, this is who we were thanking as our main supporters. This is also important because the name in the middle, which many of you may not recognize, when we signed the agreement, the state of Carl Hudig gave the Foundation for Madison Public Schools, which is now Madison Public Schools Foundation, a gift of $125,000 to help with Any Given Child. So these were the main players at the time in the backbone organization circa 2013. My understanding is they're all still involved, correct? So that has not changed.
It has expanded.
It's expanded.
It has expanded, yeah. So right now as well, Arts for All Wisconsin, Christina is here from Arts for All Wisconsin, is also
Fantastic.
on that, and then UW Arts Collab as well.
Perfect. So what happened next is that we then tried to implement phases 1, 2, and 3 under those goals. And we had some really, really great successes. After that first year, we put out this report, and all I could find access to in my files was the PDF version of it, like when you're gonna print it. So this is like front cover and back cover, do you know what I'm saying? So you gotta work with me a little bit on this. So these are not, you can't read it from left to right, but these are pages in there. Signed by Soglin, Cheatham, and Dede. The introduction to what we were doing. But part of the reason I put this in here is the data that we found after that first year is still really important and really relevant. Like for example, the educators who took the survey, and this is all educators including, oh, you've got yours with you. Fantastic, so there's a hard copy. You know,
If anyone wants to see it.
teachers in the district, classroom teachers included, 92% said the arts are important in their life, and 96% said the arts should be a part of a school education program. So we knew we were already starting with a values and beliefs proposition that people valued this. Where the trouble came was this last page of findings, these barriers, because it becomes a how are we going to solve them? Nobody was really questioning what they were, but trying to solve the problems gets far more tricky real quickly. And so this is a really good report, and I'll be sharing, this slide deck, so you can look at these pictures more closely. But down the right-hand side, I also just wanted to honor all the people who were part of the 2013-14 original team. Some of them still exist in the Madison scene, some have passed, and some have moved on to other positions, some have retired, but it's an interesting look at how many organizations really were involved in that first year. I'm gonna have you just take a minute before I finish the story and ask you, so far, from like what the community arts team found, what did you anticipate and was confirmed by the findings? Like you're kind of sitting there thinking, of course that's what they found. Or you could flip it. I was really surprised by. But then how do these findings still apply in this school year? So just take a couple minutes at your table, turn to the person next to you, and just have a conversation about what you saw.
I'll let you too. Those slides back up.
I sure can. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How you doing? How are you feeling? Okay, bye. It was so nice to meet you.
They were just different pages in the book. I mean, they were, these two may have been really nice, close to each other, because it would have been the center of the 4 page book. So I would look at that column, this column.
There's a lot to celebrate here. You can always find a date for school districts compared to, I mean, even Milwaukee. We are so far ahead as the other big districts. In terms of like vision, energy of support, and a sense of this is where we're going. It's stalled out, right?
Oh, yeah.
That looks exactly like the way it is. Still actually knows. How do we currently, right? I think it's worse because principals have just slowly chipped away at school art where it's just trying to get out. Well, especially
Yeah, I was saying that I feel like if we were to like these students today, that not like it was summer in the 90s, if we got some cultural event, kids would take everybody wanted to take dance activities, no side of it, that's on, more steel. Allocations, basically.
It just makes me think of something. So we but now we're gonna so even you know, and maybe you would break it down.
But there's, yeah, that's part of it. Oh, that's good. She'll break it down. All right, so I just promised this table that there's hope in where I'm going and how this ends today. But you had to see that. Because here's what happened next. 2014 through 18. We had 3 actions for schools. Identify an arts liaison at each of the K-12 schools. Develop an arts-rich school blueprint for instructional leaders, aka principals and their teams, to use as a guideline for school improvement planning around well-rounded education. And then present a year-long arts integration professional learning series for educators. So that was what we were tasked with doing as the schools. For the community arts team, they were charged with presenting opportunities for teaching artists and getting them training for those who wanted to teach in an educational setting, convening the Arts Education Roundtable for artists and arts organizations, and presenting the first annual Arts Education Fair in April of 2015, which happened. And for anyone involved, all stakeholders, we were going to maintain alignment with MMSD strategic plan, develop and implement a comprehensive assessment plan for any given child, further develop the fund development strategies, and develop and implement a booking system for artists and arts organizations. Those were our goals. So we released as a district Arts Rich Blueprint around the 7 areas, and there's a rubric that goes with each of these 7 areas so schools could self-assess where they were and where they were headed. And several schools participated in doing those assessments and starting to set goals. If I go backwards in my presentation, we identified an arts liaison at each school, and some of you were part of that group because I recognize some of you still from then. We had the blueprint in place, and we had 3 summers of the Midwest Arts Integration Conference here at Overture Center, 2016, 2017, and 2018. The teaching artists got training from Kennedy Center and built a team and a cohort. The Arts Education Roundtable was meeting on a regular basis, and we had an education fair here in April 2015 that also continued on in sort of mini version within our arts liaison convenings. We aligned to the strategic plan. We developed a plan for assessment. And in 2018, we hired the first ever development person at Foundation for Madison Public Schools. And there was a press release about that happening. I'll tell you how that ended in a minute. The booking system wasn't really in place, but there were strategies in place.
It is now, and I'll tell you more.
Perfect. So, 2018. So in 2018, we had things in place. Here's where I leave the district, and Kathleen is all but a month of development director at the foundation, and she leaves the position. So I don't get to tell the story about what happened firsthand anymore from June of 2018 to 2023. I can tell you where I left things in 2018. I can tell you that's where I left things. All those things were in place, and we did have an arts integration conference this summer. But I can also tell you, because I don't work for the district anymore, a couple of my truths. The reason we were stuck is that the things the community arts organizations were ready to do, we didn't have systems and structures in the district to assume them. And they were falling apart at the school levels because, for example, we had some schools doing arts integration. We had the whole curriculum and instruction team totally engaged with arts integration. We had pockets of excellence at Franklin and Randall and West Ramundo where they were doing some of the work. But we were always fighting against the time our teachers needed to prepare the literacy curriculum and the math curriculum that were mandated and tested. And those were the metrics in the end that we were holding people accountable to. And so there was this massive tension between values and beliefs and very real time and energy constraints, right? So I can tell you that we were almost there. But in order to get from where we were in 2018 the rest of the way, I think the things can get rebuilt rather quickly. There's all sorts of yous and peoples and values and beliefs, and all the things are here. But there has to be a way for the new superintendent of the school district and the team to value well-rounded education enough that we don't necessarily think about time as this thing where everybody gets a parcel, that our children get access during that time to all the things they deserve. That's no easy lift, is it? You agree with me?
Yeah.
But is it worth trying?
Yeah.
It's absolutely worth trying. And here's what I think the beauty of this story is. We've been trying for a quarter of a century. I told you I was gonna get choked up. But when I look at the work and I prepared this, the work has never changed because it's the right work. And our kids deserve it. We can do this. We've just got to figure out how. We got to do it together, and there's no one magic bullet that's going to make this happen. It's going to be a lot of individual people and a lot of individual conversations and group conversations and reminding and putting our kids central to everything we do. That's how we do it. And it's hard work. And it takes time, and we're all tired. But I hope that I don't leave this planet at least not seeing, I don't know, some glimmer that the second quarter century, we found some way to get closer to the vision of any given child. Because the kids in Madison deserve that. So, with that,
Can we clap now?
Yeah.
We can-
so with that, it's 23, 24. And then the scary side. The other 75% of the 21st century. I told you I was gonna end hope, so I'm gonna go back one slide. 2 slides. So I promised Elena that what I can't tell you is the now, in the way that those of you who are all engaged in the now can. And I think that's the work you're gonna be doing, so we don't have to do it all tonight. That's where the story picks up the next meeting you have. But I also asked her to share maybe a look at a few of the pieces of the now, so we can leave tonight like with an action and a step forward, and then this becomes the work. You all write the next chapter in the story and then invite me back when I hear you tell it, okay? All right, thank you.
And I'm Elena. I've met many of you, but not all of you. I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement here at the Overture Center. Thank you, Lori, so much.
Former trumpet player.
Yes, and former trumpet player. It is now retired. But to fill in a couple of the gaps, can I ask my partners in this room to stand? Thank you. And including the MMSD, I almost called the MMCR, MMSD team as well. So we have a great team. This was part of what you can't put on slides. I mean, you can put pictures, but we have a great team and we have incredible energy and a vision forward together. We're gonna figure out how to get there with all of you in partnership. A couple of really quick things that I wanted to mention, but we'll have another follow-up meeting in April. We can get into more specifics. But I encourage all of you as arts liaisons to take a peek around the Any Given Child Madison website. One of the systems that is up and running right now is our teaching artist roster. So you can come on to here and there's information on here about engaging teaching artists at your school communities. There's planning templates, there's information on there. There's some information on there that does need to get updated as well. But we are working on revisiting and getting more community artists added in partnership with MMSD. That's all I had. Team, anything else?
No, let's do our show.
Okay.
Where do you want to say why we're putting this here? So call it a bang.
It is such an honor to turn the stage from this side of the room to that side of the room to an organization. I told you earlier on, we had Opera for the Young in 32 of 32 elementary schools back in 2011 through 2015. I hold this